And I'm going to share my screen and then Charlene, if you want to get us started.
Yep, I can do that. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, we're good. All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It's so exciting to see so many familiar faces in the group and then so many unfamiliar faces. That's really good. That means, we're reaching other people. Um, my name is Charlene Buff. I am a water empowerment organizer for Friends of the Inyo. I'm going to start us off with some housekeeping this evening. As you see, we are not in a webinar format. We're in a meeting so that we can have a discussion at the end of this presentation. So um, please don't feel obligated to keep your camera on during this presentation. But towards the end, if you want to get on and ask any questions, we would love to hear from you. But in the meantime, if you'd like to keep your mic muted, that'll help us reduce background noise. And feel free to use the chat if you have any questions or comments. Next slide. So welcome to Revealing Payahanadu Water Management Virtual Series number 2. Revealing Payahanadu is a collaborative effort between Friends of the Inyo, Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, and Accelerate Resilience Los Angeles. The intention of this program is to share information on the impacts of water extraction in Inyo and Mono counties and help the community envision a healthier future for people and the land. We believe that being fully informed on the past, present, and future conditions of water will equip our communities to advocate for a better water future. Water is life, and the well being of all depends on protecting and stewarding our watershed. So one of the questions we're asked pretty often is, what does Payahanadu mean? So I thought it would be great to define that before we move on to this presentation. So Payahanadu is the original place name for what we now call the Owens Valley. It translates to land of the flowing water, or the land where water always flows. Uh, Rather than pass the mic around to everyone to introduce themselves, we're going to ask that you drop your name, organization, and then uh, your home waters in the chat. We're going to steal that from this last conference we were just at the Water Summit. I thought that was pretty fun to start with. So go ahead and drop your name, organization, and home waters in the chat, and we'll get to know each other a little better. Next slide. As I said, my name is Charlene Buff, Water Empowerment Organizer for Friends of the Inyo. I'm also a member of the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Tribe and a web and graphic designer. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Emily, and she can go ahead and continue introductions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Ontiveros. I am also a water empowerment organizer, and I'll share my home waters. They're Sheep Creek Wash, which is part of the headwaters of the Mojave River in the San Gabriel Mountains.
And my name is Lauren. I am the water justice organizer for Friends of the Inyo. And my home waters that I'm getting to know right now, having moved somewhat recently, is called Oso Creek and goes right by my house.
Well, I'm going to just kind of give us a little context and then I will introduce our speaker for tonight, Sally Manning. So we are in the middle now of this virtual workshop series. So this is our second session. If you missed the first session a couple weeks ago, which was an introduction and background to the Inyo Long-Term Water Agreement. So we gave some historical context. Kristen Stipanoff from California Indian Legal Services was on to help us do that. That session was recorded and there are slides in a Google Drive folder that we can share. I can drop the link for that in the chat in a second. And so we're going to be recording these sessions and that Google Drive folder will continue to be updated. So if you save that link, then you can access each session as they happen. So tonight we'll be covering on-off management, and then well, most of these are virtual series. We do have a couple of in-person things to get out and learn together. So this Saturday, March 7th, Sally is also going to be leading us on a little tour around some sites in Big Pine. And so we'll also drop the link for that registration in the chat as well. If you are planning to join and you register, that would be really helpful. So I'm just gonna do that on my other screen really quick. So there's those links to the Google Drive folder and the registration for Saturday's tour around Big Pine. Um, I just want to remind you all that we have online resources on our website as well. So on ourwaterstory.org, we have a few online course modules, one covering the history of Paehonadu, the water story. So that's there for you as a resource. We also have a basics of water management module that covers some of the basic terms and concepts that will be helpful as foundational knowledge around water rights, watersheds, and hydrology and some of the town water systems, and then the Los Angeles aqueduct infrastructure. So just some basics there to help you as a reference on our website. And so in a second, I'm going to pass it to Sally. I couldn't help, I stumbled on this photo a few days ago, and so I had to throw it in here. Sally has been working in the Valley for many years and has a wealth of knowledge. She has a PhD in botany, worked for many years for the water department, and so has a real understanding of how water is managed and is now the environmental director for the Big Pine Paiute tribe of the Owens Valley. And I'm lucky in that Sally was my boss when I worked for the Big Pine tribe, which was really my first job out of college. So I have been learning from Sally for many years, which has been wonderful. And she's so helpful to us all as we learn more about water. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you, Sally. I'll stop sharing my screen and then you can go ahead and share yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Emily, Charlene, for this opportunity, Lauren, Friends of the Inyo, and everybody else for being here. I hope you stick with this. I think the end will make it worth it. Let's hope. And hopefully I'll run this slideshow like it's supposed to run. So you should be seeing my first slide. Again, everyone, I'm Sally Manning. I currently work as serve as the environmental director for the Big Pine Paiute tribe of the Owens Valley, and most of you know me as that. But prior to coming to work here for the tribe, I was the Inyo County Water Department vegetation scientist for many years. In fact, I was with them for 25 field seasons. My graduate degree is in plant ecology from UC Davis, and my talk this evening is going to be about the on-off approach to managing Los Angeles Department of Water and Power pumping in Owens Valley. If you're somewhat familiar with the Inyo LA Water Agreement, you've heard of on-off probably, but it's possible you're a bit fuzzy on how it really works. So I've been wanting to do this quasi-technical presentation, it has cartoons, don't worry, about on-off because most people don't understand how it really works or its limitations. It's also important to know that on-off, this method is the only method that's hard-coded within the water agreement that forces LADWP to stop pumping to protect vegetation. Everything else about pumping is left to DWP's discretion, except unless they hit the so-called 20-year mining limit. And that's another story, and it's never actually going to happen, so we're not going to worry about it. By the end of this, I hope you've learned something and that's what this series is about. It's about learning. So in this presentation, if it advances, let's see, what do I do there? I'm first going to introduce the rationale behind on-off. Then next I will give a little lesson in Owens Valley ecohydrology, as I call it. Then I'll talk about how the data are collected, and we'll play are the pumps on or off game for a little bit so that you start to understand the method and how it works in the Valley. Then I'll show you how to interpret some of the permanent monitoring site or on-off data as the Inyo County Water Department presents it on its website. And finally, we'll evaluate where we are now after 35 years of implementing the on-off method. Okay, that did work. The concept behind on-off, it's pretty simple. it looks to see if there is sufficient water in the soil to meet the needs of the vegetation. So at each permanent monitoring site, we take measurements to compare the soil water content with the vegetation water requirement. If the soil water content is high, as shown in blue on the seesaw, and it's greater than what the vegetation needs, which is shown in green in the seesaw, then DWP pumps can be in on status. However, if the soil water content is less than the amount needed to support the existing vegetation, then the pumps linked to the site need to go into off status. The on-off method is applied at 22 permanent monitoring sites located from Laws in the north to George Creek area in the south, which is just north of Alabama Hills. In this little inset map, it may look like good coverage, but the truth is these permanent monitoring sites are like little pinpoints in the vast valley landscape. The 22 sites that are listed determine the on or off status of 59 DWP wells, which are listed there, and 59 wells. So here I start the lesson in Owens Valley Ecohydrology. Where does our water come from? I know you know, but this slide is showing a cross section from the sky to the ground level to below the ground level, and conditions as they should be on the valley floor. As we know, the valley gets a meager amount of precipitation water annually directly from the sky. Average annual precipitation in Bishop is a fraction more than 5 inches per year. Translated into centimeters, that's 13 to 14 centimeters. And most of that precipitation is used up by the plants or it evaporates pretty quickly. So the clouds depart, the sun comes out, and the soil dries up. So if conditions are normal and healthy on the valley floor, the bulk of the water available is in the soil, comes not from above, but from the groundwater, from below. Okay. Down below the surface, you will find saturated conditions. Where it is completely saturated, we call it groundwater. Just above the saturated groundwater is a zone of capillarity, and that's important in this talk, where the soil is wet to varying degrees, but not saturated. The soil serves as a wick, and water moves upward by capillarity. The top of the saturation is the so-called water table. A typical Owens Valley site will have dry soil at the surface, moist soil at some depth, and then you'll hit the groundwater. For most of the valley floor, as we know it, that is the valley floor and not the alluvial fans where most of us live or spend our time, then the water table should be anywhere from about the ground surface to about 8 feet deep, which is about 2 meters. So now let's introduce our plants. They're shrubs in this case. And shrubs grow woody roots, and our species of interest are known to have roots down to about 4 meters, roughly 12 feet. Okay, the root zone. This would be the conditions in a healthy, happy, shrub-dominated permanent monitoring site. The roots of these happy shrubs have access to sufficient and practically unlimited water from the groundwater. In the normal course of a summer, the plants will be using the water in the soil as they transpire. From spring into summer, we typically see the water table go down as the plants photosynthesize, grow, and make flowers and seeds. Then, when winter sets in, the plants go dormant and transpiration ceases. The water table will recover or rise again. So this is the seasonal fluctuation in the groundwater table, and it's natural and healthy, and it's due to plant transpiration. In contrast to the normal healthy scenarios, groundwater pumping is capable of easily lowering the groundwater level to lower than the plant's roots can reach. As the water table drops, however, some of the water remains in the soil. That is, the soil remains moist, just not saturated. The on-off method capitalized on the fact that the saturated groundwater may end up too deep for the roots, but that some soil moisture gets left behind and the plants can use that water, at least for a while. The depth of water is measured by a piezometer, also known as a monitoring well, and two examples appear in these photos. All you need is basically a tube in the ground, inserted into the ground, that's open on the sides and at the bottom so the water can come in. And then you need a measuring tape, lower it down into the tube and see where you hit the water table. It's pretty simple. DWP has hundreds of these throughout Owens Valley, maybe 1,000, I don't know, a lot. Okay, this is the most scientific slide we have. So let's take a look at two examples of what the water table might be doing in Owens Valley. These are hydrographs from piezometers at two permanent monitoring sites. The top one is at a control site or one of the places in the valley not directly affected by DWP groundwater pumping. The bottom graph is from a permanent monitoring site in the Sim Shepherd well field. The top of each graph, the top of the y-axis, is the ground surface, so it says it's 0 meters. Then I shaded the plant root zone, which extends from the ground level down to 4 meters. The time period for both graphs is shown on the horizontal or x-axis, and the data start in the late 1980s and go to about 2022. In the top graph, at the control site not affected by pumping, note the seasonal water table fluctuation we talked about for a healthy site. The water table high point each year is the 1st of spring, so approximately April 1st. As the vegetation transpires from spring through summer, the water table drops, but then fall and winter arrive and the plants go dormant and stop transpiring, so the water table goes up again. Through all this, the water table does not leave the root zone, and this pattern is a signal of a healthy meadow. And to me, having spent some time recently in a hospital, not myself, it looks like a heartbeat. That's healthy. During the 35-year time period shown on this graph, we have had a couple of droughts, as you know. We've also had some near record-breaking wet years, but those weather extremes are not at all obvious in this hydrograph. The water table stays within the root zone and is reliably consistent for the plants from year to year, come, hell or high water. The lower hydrograph is pretty different. This is showing what's happening in a well field permanent monitoring site. With heavy DWP pumping in the late 1980s, the water table dropped far below the plant root zone. In 1990, the water table was down there at 10 meters, which is 30 feet or more. That's pretty far from the plant roots. Then after a period of no pumping, because it went into off status, and sufficient runoff, the water table begins to recover. After about 10 years, in the year 2000, it gets into or near the root zone, and you start to see that seasonal pattern again. But when the pumps go on again, down goes the water table, leaving the plants at the mercy of any residual soil moisture. So what do the plants do when groundwater pumping lowers the water table beyond the reach of the plant roots? Well, as mentioned, the plants soak up the remaining soil moisture, which may or may not be replenished very quickly by capillarity. And if the water table stays down too long, any water remaining in the soil or supplied by capillarity is used up eventually. So the plants become stressed. They die back, they shrink. This is not so good if you're a plant. But think about it. A place like this has less soil water content, but it also has, excuse me, less vegetation to support. Sometimes this happens. That is, as the soil gets drier and drier at the pump sites, the plants are also shrinking and dying back. So the on-off method, with the on-off method, it's possible that the site could have not yet tipped that seesaw and gone into off status. It's still in balance. And DWP could then continue to operate the linked pumps, even though the site is clearly stressed. The possibility of this inherent problem I refer to as the downward spiral. So as long as soil, water, and vegetation calculations indicate sufficient water in the soil to meet the plant needs, whether that's high or low, wells could stay on under both scenarios pictured here. The downward spiral is one possible outcome, but there are others too. That is, as simple as on-off may sound, in concept, permanent monitoring sites might have a range of outcomes. Some of the factors affecting the outcomes or the results are the starting conditions. So by this, I mean when the site's status when it was first set up back in the 1980s can affect what the outcome will be, and also its condition and status the previous year from the year you go out and measure it now. The amount of precipitation will affect it and how deeply that precip percolates into the soil. The amount of pumping and how far down the water table goes, obviously that will affect its outcome. And the timing of pumping, whether they do it in the spring or summer or fall. Certainly the soil texture at the site plays a role because most of us know that sandy soil doesn't hold water very well and it will be used up very quickly. And in contrast, clays hold water so tightly that the plants can't get it off the soil particles sometimes. And then there's snowmelt runoff. Now that will eventually recharge the groundwater on the valley floor, but it can take a year before the groundwater recharges from the snowmelt runoff. In other words, the big runoff year of 2023 was most evident in the monitoring wells in April of 2024. So, and the magnitude of that recharge depends on how wet the year was, the year before. Okay, so how do we do it? I say we, because I used to do it. This is how the data are collected by Inyo County Water Department, sometimes with help from LA DWP staff. At each site, there's fence posts that mark a 100-meter transect. And if that's a new word to you, all a transect is an imaginary line across the vegetation. So the field people go out and they roll out a long measuring tape and attach it to those fence posts, which are the end posts of the transect. And then the contraption in this picture, which is called a point frame, is set up and it's run along the transect. The point frame pins are spaced 30 centimeters apart, and the field person pushes a pin down to the ground while the other person records what the pin hits, such as one green rabbit brush leaf, and all the way to the ground where it's probably mulch or bare ground, on, all the way down the 100-meter transect. The transect is run as close to the peak of the growing season as they can do it, so right near the summer solstice, which is June 21st. The point frame data are then used to calculate what's called leaf area index, which is a measure of vegetation cover at the site. The field data also tell us what the species composition is. So the mix of species and their abundance are run through some calculations and by the county staff to derive the so-called vegetation water requirement. How much do these plants need at this site to get them through the year? Okay, at each permanent monitoring site, there are 3 to 4 neutron access tubes inserted in the ground along each transect. The probe's cable is lowered into the tube and it shoots out neutrons. Fun, huh? If the neutrons bump into a hydrogen molecule, they bounce back to the probe. Presence of hydrogen indicates presence of water. A lot of returning neutrons means the soil is probably pretty wet, but if no neutrons come back, that means the soil is dry. The available soil water content is measured at each site each month. There's also a piezometer, or monitoring well at each site to measure the depth to groundwater, but the water table depth is not used directly in on-off. So after we crunch the numbers, we can answer the following question for each site. Is there sufficient water in the soil to meet the vegetation water requirement for the year? So here's where the game starts. Okay, this is a hypothetical example of what we might see. Let's say we're looking at this site on July 1st, so we have recently collected the vegetation and neutron probe data. We also know that as of the most recent reckoning last year, the site was in on status. We see now that as of the 1st of July, the available soil water is 40 centimeters. Our calculations tell us the vegetation water requirement is 26 centimeters. Is there enough soil water to meet the vegetation water requirements? Yes, I guess the answer is here. 40 is greater than 26, so the pumps can stay on. Okay, here we are at this site the next year on July 1st. The pumps have stayed on, and now we see that the pumping has lowered the water table deeper than the roots can reach. The soil is drying out, but it did rain some in the spring, and there's still some residual soil water left behind as the groundwater receded. So the plants leafed out fairly well back in the spring, and we see relatively healthy plant cover at the end of June. We run the calculations, and this year's vegetation water requirement is 24 centimeters, but the soil water content measured on July 1st is not as great. It comes in at 16 centimeters as of the 1st of July. So what is the status of this site, on or off? Well, clearly, the available water content is less than the vegetation water requirement, but because it's the 1st of July, we're halfway through the growing season. So from here on, the vegetation needs only 12 centimeters more to get it through to the rest of the year. And we measured 16 centimeters in the soil, so the pumps can stay on. But doesn't this make you a little nervous about next year? It should. So let's go to next year. It's the next year and the pumps have been on, and the water table is now very deep. The vegetation cover has declined from the previous year, and on July 1st this year, the calculated vegetation water requirement is 14 centimeters. The July 1st available water content is measured at 8. Does DWP have to turn off the pumps? No, because half of 14 is 7, and there's 8 in the soil. So again, the pumps can stay on. Are we seeing this downward spiral here now? Yes, I would say so. Okay, did I put the answer up? Oh, I jumped ahead, sorry. So now we're in year 4. The site has been in on status, the water table is very deep. This year, the vegetation cover is low again with a calculated vegetation water requirement of 12. July 1st available water content is 5. Is the site in on or off status? The vegetation needs 6 centimeters to get it through the rest of the growing season, but only 5 centimeters is available. So the pumps do go off at this site. Is turning off the pumps now going to save this vegetation? It might be better than nothing, but no, not necessarily. However, the pumps can't be turned on again until the soil water content reaches or exceeds the vegetation water requirement, which existed at the time the pumps went off. What that means is that anytime the soil moisture now hits 12 centimeters or more, the pumps may be turned on again. So it has to wait. If it rains all winter and say next March 1st, available soil water content is measured at 12 centimeters or higher, then the site can go into on status again, and DWP could resume pumping even though the water table is like nowhere in sight. But there would be another reckoning again on July 1st of that year. So what if we're now in year 5? The plants have died back even more and the vegetation water requirement is even lower. As of July 1st this year, the vegetation water requirement is 6 and the available soil water content is 5. The way on-off is, remember, we're already halfway through the growing season, so we assume the plants only need 3 centimeters to get through the rest of the summer. And we have 5 centimeters of available soil water. But we started off this year in off status. Because the vegetation water requirement was 12 centimeters last year when the site went into off status, we must leave the site in off status. until the neutron probe shows that there is at least 12 centimeters, so the site stays off. Okay. Here's something that can happen from one year to the next. Say this site in this diagram has been in off status. It is now July 1st, and it's time to see where it stands. Say we had one of those miraculous late winter storms which dropped 3 inches of rain. We arrive at the site in late June and find relatively high cover because the plants made use of that rain and they really leafed out. Note that 3 inches of rain equals 7.6 centimeters of water. By the end of June, though, the plants have soaked up that rainwater and they look pretty good, despite having no water table near the roots. The relatively high vegetation water requirement we measure, because they'll respond like as though there is a water table, at the peak of the growing season, say it's 24 centimeters. Unfortunately, though, the soil water content measured on July 1st is not so good. The winter precip is gone and the water table is gone. So say we're lucky to measure 6 centimeters on July 1st. The math and the past conditions tell us that the pumps stay off. And this might be nice if your focus is on DWP pumping, they can't pump this site, but don't you really feel a bit sorry for these plants? I mean, they leafed out. There's no groundwater under there to keep them thriving for the rest of the summer. And there's nothing we can do about it at this point. Even if the pumps are off, it can take years, like we saw 10 years before the water table can return sufficient for this plant community. So what does the future hold for this site? Heck if we know. We have to wait and go out next year and see. It turns out this year was dry with no precip to speak of, and the plants have died back. And both the vegetation water requirement and available water content are low. Even if the pumps remain off, the future of this site is hard to predict. Will the water table recover? What if it rains and the water table does not rise to the root zone? How long do these plants, long can they live in this stressed condition? Do they make seeds? If not, how does the lack of a seed bank affect the site in the future? While we don't know what will happen, most scenarios don't look good. And all of this is a reality with using the on-off method. So there are a number of factors that can mess with on-off methods' ability to protect Owens Valley vegetation conditions. Basic plant biology is one, the weather is another. And there are rules that were included in on-off, such as the rules of when during the year the methods can turn pumps on or off. Here are the timing rules for turning pumps off, and I'm not going to read them, but what this is saying is that there are only 2 dates during the year in which DWP can be moved, in which the DWP wells can be moved to off status, and those are July 1st and October 1st. However, DWP wells may go back into on status in any month that the soil water content conditions improve to meet or surpass the target, the available water content, the vegetation water requirement when it was turned off. So that can happen anytime, any month of the year, on can. Okay, again, the 22 permanent monitoring sites linked to 59 DWP pumps. The total capacity of these wells is about 150,000 acre feet annually. But there are also control sites. 11 sites, 8 of them being control sites, not affected by DWP pumping, at least not for now. And these sites all have a C in their name. So for example, BC1 is Bishop Control number 1. There are 3 listed here that were set up in the late 1980s, but then dropped, meaning it was decided not to link them to any nearby wells. Those are TA1 and TA2 were set up in the late 80s, but when visited in spring of 1989, the vegetation was dead. In my opinion, this was due to pumping, but DWP and Inyo County were in denial. And someone came up with the excuse that it looked like someone drove by the sites and sprayed herbicide on them. The sites continue to be monitored, but nothing is done with those data. Also, Inyo County Water Department advocated for TS control to be linked to DWP well number 382, but DWP said no. It is still monitored, but its results do not control well 382. Instead, a site farther away, TS3, is linked to well 382. And finally, when I said the 22 permanent monitoring sites determine the on-off status of 59 DWP wells, affecting 150,000 acre feet of pumping, there are another 39 DWP pump equipped wells that are exempt from on-off or they're unlinked. The total capacity of the exempt and unlinked wells is 82,750 acre feet per year, which is kind of a lot. Yeah. Okay, bear with me. We're getting to it. This is a graph of conditions at a permanent monitoring site as presented by Inyo County Water Department on their website. The site is Big Pine number 1. It's located at the north end of the town of Big Pine, and it's linked to 3 DWP wells, kind of big pumping wells. This graph shows a lot of information dating back to the late 1980s when the site was first established, and it goes up until recent times. In their graphs, Inyo County Water Department colors the vegetation water requirement line blue and the available soil water content line green, which is the exact opposite of the colors I would have chosen. So if I get confused, bear with me. But there's a lot happening here, so let's take a look. Again, the green line is available soil water content. It's measured monthly, so it looks a lot busier than the blue vegetation line because that's just measured once per year to estimate the vegetation water requirement. The bluish purple bars in the lower part of this picture show when the pumps were in off status. Where the bars are absent, it means the pumps were in on status. So this site, Big Pine 1, begins in off status. When it was first measured, it did not have enough available soil water. The vegetation data at the time indicated the site needed 9.4 centimeters of water, but the available soil water content was close to 0. As a result, the site went into off status. We don't really even know what the conditions were before that. Nevertheless, for the purposes of the water agreement, the wells linked to the site started out in off status, and DWP would have to wait until available soil water content reached or exceeded the 9.4 centimeters before they were able to turn the pumps on again. So what happened? For about 5 years, the site was in off status, as shown by the horizontal red arrows. Then something did happen. In the winter of 1992 to 93, it rained. As a result, the neutron probe measured 15 centimeters of available soil water as of February 1993. See that green spike? That was a wet winter. It ended 6 years of drought for the valley. And in February 1993, the available soil water content suddenly peaked at 15 centimeters because the site went into off status at 9.4 centimeters of vegetation water requirement. 15 was enough to turn the site into on status. But the site did not stay on for very long because when the vegetation was measured in July of 1993, the vegetation water requirement was actually lower, 8.8 centimeters, but by then the soil water was down to 3.3. This is less than the 4.4, which would be required for the rest of the growing season. So as of July 1st, 1993, the site went into off status. For the next 4 years or so, the site flipped on and off until July of 1997. On July 1st, 1997, the vegetation water requirement had gone up to 22.9 centimeters, but the available water content was 11.2. So that's less than half, so off it went. Okay, now at this time, because the site went into off status, when at 22.9 centimeters of required water, DWP is going to have to wait to see if the available soil water content reaches 22.9 centimeters before the pumps can go into on status. Do we know how long that's going to take? Of course, we can see it now, but at the time, nobody knew. it wasn't really possible to predict. The fact is, Big Pine 1 stayed in off status for 20 years until March of 2017, when the soil water content, the green line, rose just above 22.9 centimeters. When the vegetation was measured at the end of June in 2017 for comparison, although it was a lot better than the previous year, it still showed an abundance of soil water, more than enough to supply the vegetation. What is not shown here is that finally, after 20 years, the groundwater level rose to the shrub root zone. With the wet years of 2017, 19, and 2023, the vegetation and the soil water have definitely improved. But did we know this would happen? And let me also say that even though the site has been in on status since July of 2017, DWP has not been operating the nearby pumps, which is kind of a mystery, but they haven't. Okay. Do you want me to continue? No, I'm kidding. You've had enough. I know you have, and so let's just go to the conclusion. My nephew's cat. Meanwhile, oh, let's turn the page. Okay. Does on-off seem like rather like rolling the dice? For the plants, I'd say it's Russian roulette. Is this management? I was trying to think of an analogy, and this is what I came up with. On-off is like poor party planning. You know, it's summer, you think you probably have some beer in the fridge, so you put out an invitation for friends to come over for a beer. The friends show up. Turns out you have more friends than you realized. You go to the kitchen and find, you only have so much beer. If you have enough, everyone stays, has a great time, but if there's not enough for everyone, the party's a bust, some friends leave, they're unhappy, they may never even be your friends again. Nevertheless, you try to throw the same party again the next year because you forget that you're not capable of predicting how many friends you have or how much beer you need. On-off is a reckoning or balancing act that works out the answer too late. By the time the pumps go off, it's too late for the healthy groundwater-dependent ecosystem. You have to trust in the tolerances of the plants and hope some survive. Or in the case of the party, your friends to tolerate you and your poor party planning skills. But this can only go on for a while. It can't go on indefinitely. And you can't be pretending to be protective of the vegetation. Is on-off an effective method for ensuring the water agreement goals of avoiding adverse change? Well, let's look at some pictures from some of these permanent monitoring sites. This is TA1 in June of 1988 on the left, and shortly after it was first set up. And on the right, again, 6 years later in 1994. It did not look good, and that was not herbicide. This example shows TS1 in June of 1987, and then again 20 years later in June of 2007. Shrubs began moving into this site in the early 1990s, and the grasses had died off. And I'll tell you, 2 weeks after that picture was taken or less, the site burned up in the Inyo complex fire. This is TS2 when first measured in June of 1998. It was a pretty healthy alkali meadow, but shrubs began taking over, and in August of 2013, 25 years later, it doesn't look like a meadow. It's kind of crispy. The grasses have really died back, and a lot of shrubs have encroached. So is on-off an effective method for ensuring the water agreement goals of avoiding adverse vegetation change? No. Can managers rely on this method to protect how much pumping might be done next year? No. Does this method apply the best science now available in the technical group toolbox? No. About 20 years ago, Los Angeles and Inyo County, both the technical group and the standing committee, agreed that the on-off approach to operating DWP's pumps was flawed. The technical group was charged with developing a new method for managing pumping, or a new green book as they called it. so that the stated goals of the water agreement could be achieved. Inyo County Water Department did some work on a better alternative called water table-based management, but to this day, the on-off method is still used. And that's the end. How
Thank you
many people
so
did
much.
we
We lost nobody. Um, I think maybe we are down one person. So
Okay.
so I don't know about everyone else. I was spellbound. It felt really good to start learning, to like spend some time getting really deep into getting to know some of this technical stuff. So I really appreciate that, Sally. Yeah, I think that we will move into questions now. And the first one that we had in the chat that I think we didn't I think we you did answer how long does the pump stay off for, which is one of the questions in the chat. The other one is kind of going back to just understanding those sorts of like nuts and bolts of this process of when the soil is measured. Um, Vicky, I see that you turned on your camera. Do you want to explain your question out loud?
I think a lot of it was answered because at first,
Okay.
Sally, what you were showing was that based on the vegetation getting worse, then there's a recalibration of how much water is actually necessary. And so it goes down, down, down. But but you explain later, if I'm understanding correctly, based on other conditions like a heavy rainfall that or heavy runoff, then the vegetation can recover. So then the conditions for water requirement would go back up.
Yeah. And we did see a lot of that. And I mean, the vegetation responds as though it has that heartbeat water table, that it's reliable and there. And so we know that the precipitation, when, you don't get nutrients from the water table, but they're usually in the shallowest part of the soil. So rain really helps the plants soak up nutrients, which really helps them leaf out and grow. And then they usually grow their stems, they grow their leaves. And then when the summer heat comes, they're just using water to transpire, but they're not necessarily putting on new leaves or stems at that point. A lot of them, the shrubs that we have, they will proceed to flowering and fruiting, which takes some energy, but not necessarily as much water. So that's their phenology. And again, they are relying on that water table to make them live through that part of their life cycle. And if it's not there, that usually gets compromised. And what does that mean for the future? Yeah. So a lot of things they didn't think through when they put this in.
Um, I will go, yeah, let's do Lynn and then we can go to Seal.
So, Sally, I they actually go out there with that device and measure. I thought the soil monitoring was kind of constantly more automated, I guess. So people actually have to go out to the field twice a year to measure, read the
Once,
parameters and measure the soil moisture. There's nothing automated.
no, some of the monitoring wells are automated, but the neutron probe, a human being has to take it out there. I can get into the real weeds. We used another approach early on and then switched to the neutron probe in the early 90s because it's a more direct measure of soil water content. And it is radioactive and someone has to take it out there and they're supposed to do it monthly. They may skip some months, I don't know. But if they think it's kind of hopeless, doesn't matter. But no, it's done by humans. And sometimes I go to the sites in the winter, I see the footprints. I know they've been there. So. And the vegetation transects just run once per year in the end of June.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, that's it. It's easy. You could get it done pretty easy. A few people.
I see we have a couple hands up, but just because Seal had her question in the chat, I can read that out loud. Or Seal, I see since your camera is on, would you like to say it out loud?
Sally, I was just remembering the old drought recovery policy,
Yes.
which was unilaterally suspended by DWP. And I was wondering how that used to fold into on-off management, or if it did.
Yeah, that was really important. And it was the drought recovery policy was an overlay on this management when there was a lot of controversy over the water agreement, as most of you know, in the EIR in 1991. The county said they were approving the EIR, but they really wanted this drought recovery policy because we were in like the sixth or fifth year of a drought at that point. And it recognized that the methods that were being used to manage DWP pumps were experimental. It used that word. And it said that we would come back and assess conditions over the next few years. And DWP would pump conservatively during that time period. And hopefully when this drought ended, we would see where we stand. And then we would modify the monitoring at that point. And that is one reason why I took the permanent position as vegetation scientist, because I could see there's, this on-off stuff is like a joke. And we did need better management. And we got to 1998, a really wet year, and did see we had a lot of data by then, and we could see that the on-off didn't work. But then there were a lot of back and forth and fighting, so to speak. And at some point, DWP came in and hired some consultants who basically came in and told everybody that the drought recovery policy had ended because there was now sufficient soil water and we could go on, but we didn't ever modify any of the on-off method. And again, it's to this day, and there's just so much inertia politically to change it. So the drought recovery policy could be a whole nother talk. I'll end it there. But you're right, the drought recovery policy was supposed to save us, but it didn't.
I will happily attend that talk if you're willing to give it.
I don't want to give it. It'll be too painful.
Oh, Paul, let's go to you.
Thank you. Sally, appreciate that. I've had many discussions with you on and off status, and we had the opportunity to work a lot of years together, and I've learned a lot from you as well. I'd like to kind of go, we know that the on and off status, situation is not very, beneficial for, the environment really. And, but it's so let's go back. I'd like you to go maybe touch base on like towards the end about like kind of where the 20 years ago that they were talked about in the green book. I kind of like to see a little bit more on like next steps, maybe bringing something that back up to kind of like move forward to see, and then having, with some, I liked how you use the toolbox, the technical group toolbox. I mean, I think that these things would be really more beneficial on how we could try to help figure the problem out. Like we know that it's not beneficial for the environment, and we know it's not beneficial altogether. So I think that may be another form, another way, and I'd like to see why kind of where they left off of what are even their determination or who was there to say like this isn't working. Like we understand that there's some constraints or there's something going on. So maybe you could touch on that, or maybe let me know on another time. Thank you.
I have, if you really want to stay all night, I have 3 more slides that talk about water table-based management, which is what I mentioned. And I've done a talk on that, and there are actually some papers on it. It works for these well-field sites, at least in theory. Again, there's often rules. And it was worked out that's what we took to the technical group back in 2006. It was called the interim management plan. DWP agreed to suspend pumping while they worked on the new green book. It was the same players that Aaron Steinwan, Bob Harrington, and at the time, the head of the water department was a fellow named Tom Brooks, and he's the one who put in this interim management plan. And DWP was agreeable to it at the time, but in that time, we lost Tom Brooks as our water director, and they, I think, put in Bob right after that, Bob Harrington, and it just fell by the wayside. I could never understand why we weren't working on it harder, and then I left. So, but it has rationale, and as Aaron simply put it, the water table-based management, all you need, well, you need the depth of water. Obviously, that's what drives groundwater dependent vegetation. But he says all you really need is a ruler and a clock, because we've worked out all those monitoring wells have those calculations, like when we're going to go to the pumping plan this year, they're going to project what the water table will be next year. They all have these regression models, and using those, you can do more things with them. And that's the point of the water table-based management, is to only allow enough. If you were going to allow a pumping, it has to not be so much that it can't recover within a certain time period. And that makes more sense for the vegetation and management in general. So water table-based management, another topic for the future.
Yeah, I know that probably many of us would love to see those 3 slides right now, but seeing as we have some questions, some hands up still, I'd say let's do that, and we'll see where we're at once our questions start petering out, because let's finish tackling this topic first. But yeah, fascinating. I'm so glad you asked that, Paul, because that was going to be one of my questions too, was just sort of like a little more about like where the Green Book updating fell by the wayside. Like why, like I know that it fell through, but I'm still, I think, a little confused about why it fell through and why it hasn't really been so present, at least seemingly, for like the last 20 years. So yeah, so I appreciate it.
No, and I think that's these are the reasons and topics why I like really wanted to become the chairman of because it's like I want to like it's like we're just sitting here same old song and dance. Let's move forward. Like somebody worked on something, and let's present it again. Like, hey, this is left off. Like, So, anyways, but thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Santino was next.
Yeah, I had a lot of similar questions for that, like how in the world could 20 years have gone by if both parties agree that that something needs to change. So clearly something there for us all to track. And Sally, I think I really appreciate what you're sharing. I'm curious how and why a well becomes exempt, and and what are those wells and what are their excuses for wells being exempt?
Fish hatcheries, town water systems. They were put in the Green Book. I think they're in the water agreement too. But all it takes to exempt a well is for the technical group to agree to exempt a well, which means to me, all it takes to unexempt the well is the technical group, one party of the technical group to say, hey, get this one off the list. It's causing damage. And actually that topic did come up in BlackRock, a whole nother talk too. But vegetation, some of those slides I showed you of vegetation conditions due to on-off, the pumping, it wasn't due to pumping the wells that were linked to those sites. It was due to the fish hatchery pumps at BlackRock fish hatchery. And so they finally went around, it took like 6 years, and they finally reduced the pumping at BlackRock hatchery more to the level of what the spring used to flow. So from 12,000 feet of pumping in those days back down to 8,000, which is what the springs used to flow. That brought water table up. It's not where it used to be, but it's recovered somewhat, and it has helped the sites a bit, especially because of our wet years. But yeah, the point is that some of those exempt wells should not be exempt, in my opinion. And I think that is a subject that we need to tackle because, again, the method for some sites works because the plants were already stressed and they can go through this. We know that, unfortunately, but they can't be stressed for 20 years. And so just dealing with pumping and strategically rotating it to different places if they just really need the water was one idea. But if they constantly pump the same place over, it just chronically destroys the hydrology of that area, just like with Big Pine and the pumping at Fish Springs. So those are some of the biggest pumps in the wells. And there's another one at Sealy Springs. So any place there was a big old spring, they have some big old pumps now. And those are exempt for reasons of. And then we'll talk some more on the field trip if you come on the field trip
I
about
won't
this.
be able to, but because I feel like I remember hearing something that like mitigation, there's like even an exempt pump that is for mitigation,
Mhm.
which seems so like completely.
Alan might remember some of this. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we will talk about this. Yeah, pumping causes impact. So what is the mitigation? Well, we'll pump to mitigate for the impact. Yes, that
Thank
is
you.
a broken record that we have going going.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's go to Terry.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you, Sally. This was just such a great detailed presentation, and I really saw things I've never seen regarding on and off in your presentation. So I just want to say I appreciate that. Just a general comment, like with there being 22 permanent monitoring sites that are linked to 59 wells, production wells, throughout the entire valley, when you think about how large this valley is, it just seems like is 22 particular sites throughout the valley enough protection, for using on off? It just seems really inadequate in an elementary way of looking at it, I guess. Um, so I'm just like wondering about that. And you had mentioned that there were um some sites that aren't linked to permanent monitoring sites, and of course probably maybe some of those are exempt wells, but maybe not
Well,
all of them are. And
there's
so I
no.
just feel like that can't be enough protection, even. And I mean, it's inefficient, it's not working, we know that, especially when you just look at the pictures. I mean, your eyes are seeing that, but it just seems really inadequate. And then number two, the comment about updating the green book, like I remember that and when that was started and agreed upon, but that's not something LA ever wanted,
No.
because under the on off, they get to pump a lot more than what they would be allowed if we really truly did update the green book and looked at water table management instead. Um, and then I also remember I seems like one of the reasons why the county didn't continue pursuing that was really a lack of manpower. And that was at an era when we started losing staff at the water department, and those positions just were never refilled. Yeah, so that was pretty much my comment.
Thanks. What I did when I was hired as vegetation, so I was a field person for 4 or 5 years, applied for the vegetation scientist position, and then I had to do what I was complaining about. Because at the time, I didn't really think much of this on off or the water agreement because I didn't think it was protective of vegetation. So my contribution, along with my coworkers at the time, which would be Derek and Irene and Brian, we have a little box in the Green Book, which ends up being that vegetation reinventory, where we go into the parcels and people monitor the vegetation, compare it to the baseline. That is just advisory, though. It does not shut off wells. It doesn't turn on wells. It just is supposed to inform them of what's going on at the bigger scale throughout the valley. And to this day, it's a lot of work. It's a lot more work than collecting the point frame data or the neutron probe, and a lot of crunching of numbers and a lot of information. And yet it's just advisory. It's not used in management. So I just wanted to make sure people understood that what we hear about mostly is the vegetation conditions and where they are compared to the baseline, but it doesn't trigger any management action. That's what killed me. I couldn't, we're watching the vegetation die and we could tell why. And we even had people come with satellite data got introduced while I was there in GIS, and we were getting better and better. And that really scared DWP. And the county couldn't stand up to that, in my opinion.
Yeah. Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, so the placement of those monitoring wells or soil monitoring locations, those are placed in order to, weren't they placed to decide whether a parcel was, a vegetation community was transitioning to a drier type? So are they correctly placed? And they're to control the 120 vegetation parcels that are getting measured every year to determine whether
Each
they're going to a drier type.
each
So,
permanent monitoring site is obviously sits in a parcel. So the parcels containing the monitoring site are re-inventoried each year. And then we do a whole bunch more, or the county does, and DWP now do a whole bunch more parcels. But they were, yeah, well, they were put in the late 80s. Things were not in good shape. They had been pumping like crazy. It was dry. And the guy before me, a fellow named David Greneveld, he was the mastermind behind the on-off, and he picked the sites, and we had a few arguments about them, and the hydrologist decided which pumps they're linked to, and some of that doesn't work at all. But that's how it came about. And again, it was experimental, and it's still used to this day. That's what else can I say? It
yeah,
wasn't
well,
because they were transitioning, because a lot of things were transitioning at the time. It wasn't that necessarily, no.
there's one that controls the Sealy Springs well. What is that?
Yeah,
349, and it's on the other side of the river
yeah,
and
it
down,
was a bad one.
what, like 2 miles down. So I don't know
TA5.
what it's controlling. I mean, that well hasn't been in off status ever. But I'm not
Right.
sure I understand the purpose of that location.
Okay, see, you get it.
I imagine there are other examples
Yes,
like that.
there are.
Santina.
So Sally, when you say hydrologist, is that LADWP hiring a hydrologist? Is that Inyo County hiring a hydrologist? Who's hiring and getting like collecting the information? Who goes out and do those tests? Like, do both parties go out and do the testing and then they compare? I'm just curious around who's giving this information and is it LADWP paying for that data
As
and
far
the
as I know, the
science?
soil moisture, the soil water content neutron probe work is almost all, it's all done by Inyo County. At least it was by the time I left. And they never had a neutron probe that I know of. Okay, well, hydrologists are like the top of the food chain for that science. They have a degree in hydrology and they get paid a lot, and they do the modeling and come up with the regression models and suck up all the data and put it through and tell you what's going on. Hydrographers are DWP employees that drive around and check on things in the field, check on depth to water. The Inyo County Water Department has one or two hydrologists and have had that position filled since the 80s. And I think the hydrologist right now, Tim, is on the call here. But then the water department has field technicians who would go out and collect the neutron probe data, if that's your question. So,
I
but
guess,
both Inyo County and DWP do have hydrologists on
okay.
staff.
And do they ever like have disagreements in like LADWP says that it's like, or Inyo County says it's groundwater pumping is the cause of these issues, and LADWP says it's climate change and drought, or I don't know, like, does that happen ever? And could that be yeah, I'm just curious.
Often what DWP hydrologists say, something like, the water table came up. What's wrong with the vegetation? Why isn't it looking good? And this is where I get into this. People come up with these hard numbers of how deep can the water table go. It really is site specific, and it does depend on the soil characteristics and the vegetation that's there and how deep their roots were to begin with and what the site history is, because those are not hard numbers. But the hydrologists kind of look at it that way. Well, the water table's up to the baseline. What's wrong with this vegetation? Well, the baseline's kind of like flawed probably, and maybe it needs to stay there for the next 3 years. You can't just immediately pump it down. So there, these kinds of things, when you haven't, sorry, if you're a hydrologist, haven't been trained in biology and understand the nuances of plant communities and what they're responding to, you kind of lose your patience over these darn shrubs, they're just weeds to them sometimes. So that's what happens. And
Yeah, those pictures were very clear. Like, I know nothing about vegetation or hydrology, but you put those two pictures up next to each other, and like yeah. Thank you for all the work, Sally.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm going to go ahead and read a comment that Alan put in the chat. He said, since 82,750 acre feet is exempt from on-off, how much LADWP available pumping capacity is left on the table? The exempt amount is such a struggle if we want to have better water management. Agreed. I'm not quite sure what the question is. If you want to put a little more context in the chat or say anything out loud, Alan, please feel free. But I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, I think it was more just a comment. I mean, I think the last 10 years, the like that exempted amount of 82,000 hasn't even been pumped. And so, I mean, this whole on-off deal, when you have that much exempt, almost doesn't make sense, because they have the ability to pump at will, and that's a struggle.
Yeah, what's 150 plus 82? It's up there in the 240,000 acre feet range. This is a mystery. I don't understand why they aren't pumping some of the wells that they could be. And they, of course, they're being so conservative and nice, but something must be up, I think. I don't know what's going on. And maybe it's good, but if we can keep it that way, keep the lid on it, and take advantage of the fact, point out they're not pumping the 150,000, 200,000 that they used to. They obviously don't need it. The sites could recover. We could probably do more to help them recover using fire or some weed control, and keeping the water table now within, shooting range of the roots. So there are possibilities here, which I didn't think I'd see when I left. I mean, things were looking really bleak in those days. So when I left the water department.
If I can build on that, Sally, I know that sorry, saw Santina's comment in the chat about really grappling with just how many gallons make up a single acre foot, which I think is a very good point. And but yeah, I would love to hear a bit more from you, Sally, and I know we'll talk more about this soon, but just about like you said that they're not pumping some of the wells. Is that just this year that they're not taking quite as much as you think they could be or should be, or is this a longer thing? And because I know last year I think it was around like 50,000 acre feet or so. And they love to pat themselves on the back by saying, we could be taking this much, but oh, we're doing so good by only taking this smaller amount, which is very frustrating. But yeah, I would love to just hear a bit about what your thoughts are on that for this year, especially.
I don't know why they're not pumping so much. I just, it doesn't make sense to me, but I'm glad, but I don't know the reason.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Holding them to it sounds like a good plan then, saying like this or less. Like,
yeah,
once they show us they can do less, then like just really trying to keep it at that while pushing for structural change.
I think they were playing a game this year when they came up with their final pumping number because it was about what Inyo County Water Department first recommended. And yet they're not even meeting that, but they couldn't just drop it because people wanted them to. So they had to save face by picking that number and blaming it on Inyo County Water Department. So the strategy this year is like, let's make that recommendation even lower, see if they will play that game. Um, is it a game? I don't know why they're not pumping as much. Yeah.
Okay. I agree. Yeah. They love to say, oh, they actually listened and they did what Inyo County Water Department first recommended, completely ignoring that the Inyo County Water Department and supervisors as a whole recommended a much lower number ultimately.
Ultimately.
Yeah. All right. Further questions?
I mean, there's been recommendations, Sally, yes. Like there's been suggestions of what to replace this with, I imagine. And are
Well,
those
I think we got to keep it for a time. I mean, you can't just, but it can't be the only thing that determines the conditions at the site. So I think we need to integrate water table, which you'll talk to Inyo County Water Department. They'll first thing they say when you say that is DWP will never go for that. And so they drop it. But you know, this is the year 2026. The term groundwater dependent vegetation was nobody had heard of that in the 1980s. I mean, some of the literature in those days was like people doing work in Australia. It was hard to come by. We were shooting in the dark, really. And now it finally got on people's radar, and with Sigma coming along, I mean, there's been, been through some changes, and it's also given locals more say in what their hydrology should be. And I think the county could capitalize on that and just be more, make more noise about it and see where DWP might meet us. But if they don't do anything, DWP just continues to run the show. They got exempt from Sigma because of the water agreement, and people will say that the water agreement regulates their pumping. Well, this is what this talk is, that's it. That's not regulation. That's just, it's a little game they play, and that's the main thing that Inyo County can bring to the table as far as affecting a decision.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
And Santina, it's monopoly money water. That's how I think of it. Like, we don't do gallons or like big stakes here. Acre feet. Sorry.
No, good. It's just something that came up at this summit that we talked about like some of the language is so disconnecting. And I as a commoner know what a gallon of water is. I don't know, like it's harder to imagine a football field, right? Or I feel like that's been described as a football field, but when I hold like when I see a gallon, I relate to that. And then when I imagine 324,000 gallons of water, and you're telling me how many, like 360,000 square acre feet or whatever that is, like that's a lot of it hits me differently as a community member, honestly, for some reason.
I totally agree with that.
Our calculators don't go up that high though, so we have to use acre feet.
See, and that's a really interesting point too, right? It's so big, we can't even really name it. So we have to create a different name to make it seem like this is really, thank you for all the work, Sally. You're really very special.
It's better than hectare kilometers or whatever it is. Hectare meters. Oh my gosh. At least we don't do that.
Thank you so much, Sally. Do you want to share anything about Saturday, what we'll be seeing, that folks could get folks interested?
Yeah, I thought we would meet at what's called the Glacier View Campground, the north end of Big Pine. It used to be called the Triangle Campground. And about 10 o'clock, I think we said, Emily, and there's plenty. I mean, I can talk about 3 or 4 things just there, and then we'll head down through town and stop on the reservation. We'll measure depth to water, and we'll talk about all the ways that DWP is just totally harassed Big Pine, whether it's the tribe or the community, and there's this endless number of things to talk about. And tomorrow I will narrow it down to something that, and the final stop would be the Fish Springs hatchery and or going around to the old 5-acre pond, which is now dried up and has mostly been dried up for 55 years. So that would be the end of the trip if we stay that long, or if we skip a few things and get there. I'd like to end at a reasonable time. I think you should bring lunch and water. It might be windy, I hear, but it shouldn't be too bad. It won't be too hot, I don't think. But yeah, DWP, it's like they really don't like Big Pine. And I don't know why, but because I think they feel like they haven't squeezed it hard enough. They still see water here after all they've done. They still see water and they can't get it. So. And
Thanks,
there are a
Sally.
couple of on-off sites, Big Pine 1, Big Pine 2 we could visit, which aren't much to look at, but they're there.
Thanks. I'm really looking forward to it. And I put the link for registration in the chat again, if people wouldn't mind registering, just so we know who to expect. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, mostly we'll be like on roads or, roadsides that are roads, and not too much walking unless we decide to walk out to the 5-acre pond. I like to walk, but we don't need to. Well, thanks everybody. Really, what a turnout.
Thank you
Sally.
so much,
Sally.
Sally. This was incredible. We so appreciate your patience in breaking this down for the layperson. The arc that you drew for us to really, really pare it back and start at the basics and build up from that was masterful. So I really appreciate that time and effort that you put in for this.
Okay.
And I wish I could
Well,
be there on
thanks.
Saturday. Other people, if you're able to, please go.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
See
much.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Sally. Such a treasure, that one.
Agreed.
Love it.
Should we stop the recording now?
Sure.